Bye. Uh, Hi guys. Um, Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you wherever you are. My name is Na Okaile, and you can call me Madam Mental. But for today, I'll be your host. Today, I'll be your host, and I'd like to welcome all of you from wherever part of the world you are joining us from.
No, I'm so sorry.
Hi, Doc.
Hey, how are
Good.
you?
Is it afternoon where you are or evening?
It's morning. It's morning. It's
Oh,
morning.
it's
How are
morning.
you?
Oh, it's afternoon here in Ghana. Good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm very fine. And you?
I'm good. So
That's
sorry.
lovely. I was just welcoming our guests, and then we'll zoom in straight up into today's session. So, like I was saying, welcome everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you wherever you are streaming live from. I My name is Now Kindly. You can call me Madam Mental. And today I'll be your host. I will be hosting Dr. Unati, and I'll be introducing her shortly. But today we are discussing trauma and how we can overcome. Trauma is a significant theme in our everyday life, especially with our mental wellness. And I believe one way or the other, wherever you are streaming live from, you may have experienced something that has put you in a traumatic position before. And today we will be extensively talking about it, especially from the professional angle and how to apply it to our everyday life. And like I said earlier, I have Dr. Unati with me. Dr. Unati, are you Kenyan?
No, this is funny because even when I was in South Africa, I was always called Kenyan. I'm South African.
Wow.
Yeah, bred South
Okay.
African.
Oh, wow, wow, wow. So Dr. Nati is South African by birth, but currently in Canada. She is a family physician with over 14 years experience. She is a certified transformation life coach, and she focuses extensively on men's health, especially mental health for boys, which I think is very dear to me. I think that struck me very much because I'm also very concerned about men and their mental wellness. And she's currently pursuing her MBA in business and corporate communications. She's immigrated from South Africa to Canada in 2010. She's also the founder and medical director of United Medical Clinic and Dr. M Health Corner in Canada. Dr. M Health Corner is also on Instagram and all other social media platforms, just in case you want to reach out to Dr. Unati. Now, outside her clinical practice, she is involved in the community building mental health projects and with immigrant services in Calgary, schools, and other private organizations. She is the president and co host of this platform, Black Mental Health Matters. She is quite active on social media, i.e., Facebook and Instagram, under, like I mentioned, Dr. M Health Corner. That's her social media handle. She's the first Black physician in Canada to host a men's health talk show. That is first Black um, physician, and not just Black, but first African physician to start a men's health talk show in Canada. And she currently launched her online course, Men Get Depressed Too, and I think you will love to enroll on this program, especially whether you're a man or a woman. I think you all deserve to learn to have this information. So follow her on IG and Facebook on Dr. M Health Corner and enroll on this mental health program. Men get depressed too. So that's a very comprehensive introduction about our guest this afternoon or this morning, this evening, wherever you are. And if you are joining us, kindly let us know your comments. Let us know what your expectations are. Unfortunately, I won't be able to acknowledge everybody we have online, but wherever you are highly welcome. And I hope you enjoy your stay here. So, Dr. Onati, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nat. It's so funny to be on the other side now. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for hosting
It
me.
feels funny for me too because
It
more
does,
times
right?
I am the one who is the guest, and today I am the host.
Yeah,
So there we have it. There we have it. Welcome. I hope you are doing well today. How is your Saturday going?
it's good. Just started. It's 7 o'clock
Mm.
here in the morning. So that's
And it's
okay.
1 p.m. in Ghana.
I
I mean, 2
know.
p.m. in
Yes,
Ghana.
it's 2 p.m. Yes. And actually it even changes. It's changed in winter. In summer it's gonna go back. All the time changes. But that's
Okay.
okay. Yes.
Okay. 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 So, Doc, today we are talking about trauma.
Yes.
Um, and like I said earlier, I believe many of us have had certain experiences that have triggered traumatic events in our lives. From the clinician's point of view and general point of view, what is trauma?
Thank you so much, Nat. This is my favorite topic because it's the main reason I started the men's health show and focus on boys. Basically, trauma, we just want to look at it extensively, what it means.
Mm,
Trauma basically is any event. I'll probably start with kids because that's where usually things get a little messed up. So if you're a
mm,
child, you have experienced a threatening event, whether personally or witnessed it, that's trauma. And a lot of times people underestimate these traumas when they occur. Like for instance, trauma, there's many types. Bullying, I'll make an example of something that a lot of times we overlook. Bullying is a type of trauma where you are either bullied
mm,
physically, you are pushed, you are punched. We see this a lot in our schools or everywhere. Or you are bullied. I'm a foreign national in another country. We do see racism in foreign countries, and sometimes it happens even in Africa amongst cultures, sorry,
exactly.
tribes. So that's also something that we need to consider at a serious, close knit observation. And of course, we look at complex trauma where a child is exposed to several or multiple events. I'll make an example in the recent years, in 1997, between 1997 and 1998, Kaiser Permanente Institute and CDC in the States, they came up, they took this big study of 17,000 graduates, actually. And basically, they looked at these 10 components, which I'm going to read through here. They looked at what happened to these people when they were kids. Number one, were you exposed to any violence in your family? Either your parents were fighting, or you witnessed it, or probably, like I said in the definition, you witnessed it, or it was done on you. Did you experience any physical or sexual or emotional trauma? That's basically abuse and trauma, right? And of course, your parents, were they married right throughout, or was there any separation or divorce? Was there any uncle or your father or any family member that was incarcerated? Someone went to jail. Oh, was there any mental illnesses? That one is interesting because in Africa, this is something recent. We're trying to bring it up because mental health is not something we talk about in Africa. But looking
Exactly.
back, growing up in my small town, I did see people with schizophrenia. Now I know psychiatry, I know mental health, but these people were wondering, how many people are wondering right now in your location, right? And there's no help, like the government, not much is done, there's no institutions for them. So these are the issues. And of course, exposure to poverty. Or probably were you exposed to some violence? Were you in terrorism involvement? Did you go we do have young people sent out being soldiers. So all these things, if you were far, you found yourself in these instances I mentioned, that's traumatic to a growing brain. We'll talk about
Mm,
it more as we go
mm.
along. And of course, trauma,
Yeah.
community trauma, mobs that occur. I'll make a perfect example. In South Africa, before I left for Canada, there was a big xenophobic attack towards other African people. That's a community trauma. And the sad part is it did not only affect the foreigners that were in South Africa, even everybody, because it was out in the news. Imagine a child, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, who's usually sitting in front of TV with her parents or his parents, seeing all the mobs, seeing
Mm-hmm.
all the riots, seeing all the people that were burned. That's traumatic. That picture stays in the mind of a child, right? So that's basically
Yeah.
part of community trauma. And of course, like I mentioned, things that happened like in terrorism, people, we have refugee trauma too. You are displaced from your country. We've seen genocides in Rwanda, in Africa. So these are the things
Mm.
in Sudan. These are the things that, unfortunately, when we go through them, people don't realize they are traumatic. And we see them, more especially when I moved to this side of the world, when we see other African people actually moving to this side who are refugees in this side of the world. We try to actually remove that word and say it's newcomers. Newcomers, when they move from their countries, they do exhibit the traumatic experiences and also the outcome, which we're going to talk about as we go along.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank
And great submission right there. If you are joining us right about now, we are talking about overcoming trauma. And Dr. Onati just explained what trauma is. If you encounter any experience that brings you distress, it is considered as trauma. So any part of the world you are in, whatever happens around you, whenever you are faced with a challenging situation that puts you in an emotional or psychological distress, that is enough to be considered as trauma. Thank you very much, Doc. And going forward, what are some of the events, specific events in everybody's life or in our everyday life that can expose us to trauma and even traumatic events?
Right. I mean, the day to day experiences we hear of the wars around us. And
Mm,
like I said, it's witnessed or it's also heard of or you experience it. We hear of the wars around us. We've seen a big chunk of people moving from their countries to other countries. That's basically can be traumatic. I remember actually a few years ago when my son was 9 and he was constantly worried about the Syrians. As we all know, when the Syrian war exploded, they were dismissed. They were displaced to other countries. So that was what was seen on TV. So that was traumatic for him. And for some time, he constantly asked about why is God not putting a stop to this? Like, kids, they start asking these things. So
exactly.
we had to actually honestly, stop watching TV in front of him. So stuff like that. And the day-to-day thing, the political stress sometimes, constantly people are
Mm,
stressed about the surroundings, what is happening politically in your country. People are frustrated, they don't see any progress. That's traumatic because let's look at a new graduate. You come out of university, you're excited, you want to be out there showing your skills, and there's no job. That's traumatic to that young
mm,
person because you had all the dreams. So it's not only affecting children, it's affecting also adults, right? And
yeah.
also the loss. You know, let's not ever underestimate the loss. Right now, we're going through the pandemic, which is global. No one knows. It's an uncertain situation. People are very stressed. As a psychologist, you probably have seen a lot of your patients now with depression and PTSD, and
Yeah.
also people with OCDs. People are very anxious right now. So even globally, it's
Yeah.
something that's not even actually in your care or in your control. We're seeing that, right? So stuff like that
Mm,
or loss, like, I mean, people don't have time to grieve. We are losing family members. We are losing our families. We are losing our colleagues. People are dying of COVID-19 on top of other things we were
mhm.
dealing with, right? So that's traumatic. And loss of relationships. Right now, we're seeing people actually, I forgot to mention in the beginning, the other type of trauma, the intimate partner, it can also cause violence. I mean, we
Yeah.
all know that World Health Organization tells us that the 38% of murders globally, they are due to a close intimate partner. That's trauma. And you remember,
Hmm.
children, they either witness it or they also experience it. And I don't want to underestimate the fact that also women, they tend to be abusive towards men. That's why I'm a big
Exactly.
advocate for that, because men, they have not really found the strength in their voice to come out and talk about their own experiences in trauma. So that's
Hmm.
another thing that we actually need to look at. So the family trauma like that, the loss, the bereavement, and also poverty, there's quite a few things that could cause trauma to a lot of people, actually. And it depends on your resilience. Not every trauma or traumatic experience would lead to long-term effects. We'll talk about that.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a key point there, that
Yes.
not every traumatic event will lead to long term, especially mental health effects.
Yes.
And many people are actually living trauma, but they do not know.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, they don't know
Let's
that
not go there.
certain reactions are trauma response,
Yes.
and they continue the cycle, and by the time you realize, they're passing it on to probably children or other people that are in their significant circle. And because we don't know what to look out for
Yes.
when we are faced with traumatic events, it doesn't give us an opportunity to appreciate what we've gone through and how to even seek help and then build the resilience to come out of it. 2 days ago, a friend of mine called me. Last year, she witnessed a fire in her house.
Mm.
She lives on a flat, and the flat started burning. She managed to come out. She said she was asleep, and she didn't know how she even woke up and got out of the building.
Yeah.
But her next door neighbor got burnt and he died. And she said when she was coming out of the flat, in her mind, she knew the guy liked to party and all of that. So obviously he may not be home. So she didn't bother to check up on him. But when she came down and everybody was downstairs except that person,
Mm.
they started wondering, where is this guy? Where is this guy? Say, by now he's with his friends. I'm not sure he's home by now. But they kept calling him. His number wasn't going through. And then his friends came to meet the scene, and they said, we hear your flat is on fire. Where is XYZ? He said, we thought he was with you guys.
You
He said,
guys.
no, he's home. Only for them to find the guy burnt in his sleep. Until now, a year on, she hasn't recovered from the shock.
Yes. Yes.
People around her feel she's exaggerating, she should have snapped out of it, and all of that. But she knows what she saw. She keeps having, images and all of that. And I
Yes. The
think it's because
flashbacks are
people
common.
don't know what to look out for when you are traumatized. So, Doc, what are the signs we should look out for to tell us that these response or these reactions are out of trauma and we need to have
Yes.
a look at it?
You know what? Thank you so much now for mentioning that actually. And you know what? It's very common. That's probably now is she has PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah,
She has those symptoms as you are
exactly.
explaining it. So the things that we need to look at, I want to actually start with this one. When in that study I was talking about that was done back in 1997, there's an issue of epigenetics, which means the inherited family trauma, and a great great uncle or aunt you've never met who so committed suicide, and that trauma that he or she experienced is showing up in your life right now, or just down
Yeah.
the generations. This is a generational trauma. Let's talk about the
Mm.
US. When the people from Africa, the slavery, right today, they are suffering from post-slavery syndrome. This happened back then. Is it happening right now? No. The issue of post slavery trauma, who is mostly incarcerated in the States, who is mostly obese, who has diabetes, all these things. Unfortunately, when trauma happens to you, it can change hormonal effects on your brain,
Exactly. Exactly.
the brain structure too. So you are actually at higher risk of developing chronic illnesses. Now you start developing obesity because at that stage when these things happened to you, You were always in that hyper vigilant state. We call it
Mm.
flight, fright, and fight
Yeah.
mode.
Fight mode. Yeah.
Yes. When that toxic stress happens, we call it toxic stress. When it happens, it freezes you. You become numb. Your friend now is experiencing those effects.
Yeah.
So you become numb. And what happens? Because you are in this hyper vigilant state, what happens to your hormones? They go up. Cortisol. Cortisol is our
Exactly.
stress hormone.
Stress hormone.
It goes up. When you have high cortisol, you become unfortunately obese because cortisol can cause
Mm.
obesity. Now, what happens when you're obese? You have a higher risk of diabetes. Can you see now it goes on and on? You have higher risk of
Mm.
diabetes. You have higher risk of high blood pressure. You have higher risk
Exactly.
of heart diseases. So these are the things that we cannot just underestimate. That's why I always say when you see people, always question it this way: what happened to this person? I don't say what's wrong with you anymore because we don't know what happened to a person. You don't
Yeah.
know that person's story. So those are the things. And those people also have a higher risk of developing lung diseases. You see people at a younger age start smoking. You see
Mm.
12-year-olds, all these teenagers doing all that. It's the exposure of trauma. And of course, the other obvious symptoms, a lot of people don't realize they are actually presenting from a place of trauma: the irritability. You become
Mm.
this person who is very angry. People cannot stand you. You cannot make friends. Even at work, people cannot stand you because, oh, you are this defensive person. You are always at a defense. People are scared to walk around you. They walk on eggshells, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's that. Or yourself, your heart rate is always kind of like pumping. You are in that, like I said, you are in this hyper vigilant state. The
Yeah.
heart rate goes up, you are irritable, you are guilty. A lot of times, people who have gone through trauma,
Exactly.
they have so much guilt. Your
Guilt
friend,
and blame.
I'm pretty sure she's guilty today that why didn't I wake up my friend?
Exactly.
There's that guilt you walk around with. There's shame. People that went through trauma, they are very shameful. For instance, if you experience sexual abuse, you're ashamed to talk about it. You have never shared it with your parents. You've never shared it with your spouse, right? So these are the issues that people they walk around with it. And again, like I said, I'll make an example. With this trauma, there's two things: there's trauma, exposure to trauma, and also the resilience. How do you become resilient? When you have nurturing around you as a child, it doesn't matter. I always say it doesn't matter if it's a biological parent, if the community where you are growing, there's support, or there's grandparents that love you, that would build your resilience. And that's why in the beginning we said not every child would develop these long-term effects. So resilience is
Yeah.
something that's important. The nurturing of a child is key. And also that building, that self-esteem. And we know that self-esteem is built at the age of 3 going forward.
Mm.
All right. And of course,
People do not know that. People
we'll
think
talk
children
about
at
that.
that
Yes.
age actually don't know
Yes.
what's happening around them.
Yes, yes. So people they struggle with self-esteem. They don't know who they are in the world. They don't know the choices. Like I said, if you were exposed to violence in your family, you were exposed to just dysfunction in your family, you start attracting that to your life. You start attracting unavailable friends. You start
Mm.
attracting unavailable spouses. You also have attachment issues because you were never nurtured as a child. Those friends.
Exactly.
Actually, it's interesting. Just before we started our show, we're just chatting with other friends, people talking about, I don't like a friend who is clingy. Those type of
Mm.
people, something happened to them in their childhood. They have issues with attachment. They were never nurtured. They were never loved. So when they find this friend, they
They
attach. They
want
don't
to.
want you to be friends with other people. And it's not only in children. We see it in adults too.
Exactly.
We see it in
Yeah.
adults too. All right. So that another thing, also going back to being raised by a single parent, no family dynamic there, no married parents. I'll make an example. I grew up with a single parent, but of course, as you know that us in the African dynamic, we have this extended family unit which
Yeah.
protects a child, right? But again, it has to be a healthy unit because what's the point of being raised with uncles that will abuse you? Because we do see that dynamic too,
Mm.
right? How many children out in Africa or in the other African or people of African descent globally who experience this daily and the parents are scared to talk about it? It's something that I said,
Exactly.
the shame. People don't want to talk about it. And who suffers is this child who continues carry this trauma. carrying this trauma, not doing anything, and then presents as an adult who is aggressive towards the partner he will or she will meet in the future. Because maybe she or he saw parents fighting. That's how he does his problem solving with his or her partner.
Mm,
Aggression, violence. That's why we see violence in the world. Those adults
exactly.
had witnessed it somewhere in their childhood, right? The drugs. You asked about how do people present the drug abuse we have right today. It's the children or the adults today that had experienced it in their childhood or that inherited family trauma. Maybe a great great uncle you never met was an alcoholic. Now it's
Mm,
playing down. That's the issue of epigenetics. So it's a serious issue that people need to look at their stories and remembering that we never chose our backgrounds. We never chose our parents. And like I said, in my case, I'll make an example, a story about myself. I was raised by a single parent. For me, it took me time to trust an opposite sex. It took me time. I always guarded my space. I never wanted that because I never saw my dad and my mom together. Do you understand?
yeah.
So this is something that is growing out in the world. It doesn't matter which nation or which race you come from. This
Mm-hmm.
affects every children. Do you understand? You have to meet someone who's gonna meet you halfway, who loves you dearly, and then who can walk you through this. And also you can deal. I had to go through some psychological help myself. I had to see a psychologist to help me with the mindset that not every man will not be available. Do you understand? So there's
Exactly.
that fear. A lot of times people don't address that fear and the guilt,
Mm,
just the fear of not wanting to live to the fullest. It's very common.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. 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 You mentioned something about parental violence, right? And how it exposes us to trauma response. There's something we call trauma bonding, right?
Yes,
Here
yes,
in Africa, once you're African and you've lived, let's say, a significant part of your life here in Africa, I'm sure you also identify with this. When people are in abusive relationships, whether the male or the female is abusive, whichever one of them, we
yes,
tend to use our children as the reasons why we are still in those relationships,
yes,
not knowing how this, tension, this toxicity affects our children. They
yes,
grow up and the cycle continues.
yes, yes,
Is there any way we can talk about abuse in gender-based abuse or domestic violence
yes.
and the impact on trauma
Children,
and
yes,
how it creates, trauma bonds and trauma response as we
yes.
grow?
You know what? Thank you so much now for mentioning that. And you know what? It's not only in Africa. I see it here. It's
Wow.
cross culturally, yes. It's cross culturally. It's I think it's the human nature. Women, we have this nurturing nature. We want our children. That's the picture we want to give. But then the problem is, in the first place, when a woman or a man finds himself or herself with an unavailable or aggressive or violent partner, it goes back to what happened to that parent herself or himself. So I
Yeah.
don't want us to start with the child he or she has. It starts with what happened to this parent. Because if this parent was raised in a stable background, herself or himself, he or she would have a stable mindset and intact self-esteem to choose best for herself or himself. So
Mm,
it starts there. So the reason why I mentioned self-esteem at the age of 3, trauma is real in childhood. I mean, and it affects the children. So not only that parent was exposed to trauma in her life and it continues, now she brings it or he brings it to this union she has because that's what she had or seen at that age. It had become her normal or his
yeah.
normal, right?
Exactly.
So the reason why women or men stay in these relationships, it's their normal. They need a certain approach, a certain help from a psychological perspective to
Mm,
actually show them, like I said, brain changes when you have gone through toxic stress. The executive functioning, the reasoning, the judgment in your prefrontal cortex, it does
mm,
change. How the synapses occur there, it changes. All right. So it's usually even your judgment is poor because of the severe trauma. Trauma is not
mm,
only about being hit in the brain. just the
Exactly.
experiences you have. So it does a lot of times. I've actually done a study, I mean, looked at the studies closely, why people continuously expose themselves to trauma to a point of compromising their children. They have poor judgment. Now, they have poor judgment because of their executive dysfunction. Their judgment
And
is
that
poor.
is because of their trauma they have also gone through.
So it becomes a generational trauma. So unfortunately, they can never move out of those situations, and that's why a lot of them sometimes they don't even move out. They die in their marriage. You've seen where spouses literally kill their partners. I mentioned in
Exactly.
the beginning.
Exactly.
So it's usually what happened to the parent himself or herself. So that's basically where we should start. As a result, now, like I mentioned, the adverse childhood experiences is something we look at. When I look at my prenatal mothers, we put down all that, we tick the box. What happened to her? Because we need to help her while she's pregnant, because that trauma she experienced is the one that she will actually transfer to the unborn child.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. Wow. Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Wow. If you are joining us now, it's not too late. We've been talking about overcoming trauma. We've discussed what trauma is, what are some of the significant signs you can pick up to tell you that you are responding to trauma or you have been through a traumatic experience and you have not dealt with it. So, Doc, going forward, what are some of the long term effects of trauma, what we will call post-traumatic disorders, that
Yes.
in the short term we'll look at irritability, poor judgment, and all these things that come in as trauma response. But in the long term, looking at our mental health also, because this platform is a mental health platform,
Yes.
weighing, looking at the two balls, that there's trauma here and there's mental health here. How does trauma in the long term
In the long
affect your
term.
mental health, and what are some of the traumatic disorders that people experience?
Thanks. Now, depression. We see major depressive disorders, and I'm hoping
Mm,
we'll start doing our own studies in Africa so that people are aware that they are living with depression. Because a lot of times, like I said, the patients I've seen here who came from war zone areas, like I have a lot of patients from Sudan, from Rwanda. They experienced trauma, right? And when you look at the history of how long they've lived that way, it's many years. For as long as they could remember, like as young as they were 5, they can remember clearly what happened. So, major depressive disorder is one of them. Generalized anxiety disorder, you are in that
mm,
anxious state, you are always fearful, right? You think that something bad is going to happen. And we talked earlier about post traumatic stress disorder. Sorry, we see that, and of course the chronic diseases I mentioned, the diabetes, right,
mhm,
the high blood pressure, the hypertension, and which could later lead to strokes and also heart diseases. There's so many things, right? And I mean, the obesity right now, we have actually added obesity as a disease. It is the same status on
yeah.
the protocols. Yes, on the guidelines, obesity is one of the illnesses that come out of trauma. Like I mentioned, with all the cortisol levels that are affected your hormones, right? And of course, just they being unable to maintain relationships. It's very important. We see it a lot, the attachment issues. We see people a lot of times, they would actually, because they have not dealt with their trauma, you probably have seen this. We do see people actually who are successful in their personal, or maybe let's say in their academic or in their social status. They are CEOs, but you wonder why this man or this woman is changing partners. Some of them, they are struggling with narcissistic personality disorders because they grew up with narcissist parents. So this is
Mm,
something serious. A lot of companies, unfortunately, are led by narcissistic CEOs. And the
very true.
problem is, yes, the problem is now, and I'm hoping things will change. COVID-19 has brought a lot of changes. A lot of times, companies are looking at meritocracy. This person is a Harvard candidate,
Mm,
is a good fit, but lacks emotional intelligence and social
Yeah.
intelligence because he was never or she was never socialized as a child. So unfortunately, we are led in companies, big organizations, because organizations today, they only focus on the money part, not looking at the dynamic and the health of their companies.
Mm,
You see a lot
mm,
of people changing jobs because they cannot stand their CEOs that have narcissistic. Narcissism is a learned behavior. You
yeah.
have experienced some trauma if you didn't know, and it's so hard to treat. It needs an insight.
Very,
It's
very,
so
very,
hard. You
very,
know that, right? Yeah.
very
So
narcissistic
there's a lot of those.
clients. Oh,
Yes, right. So we see that a lot of that, and we've seen also children who were born or who were born into this dysfunctionality, struggling with stuff like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorders.
yeah.
Our teachers get concerned about your child who's everywhere in his mind or her mind because of all of this. This is toxic for the child. I mean, a
Mm,
growing brain. And remember, our brains mature at the age of 25. So all this
exactly.
trauma, it could happen even at your age when you're at university. If something happens, I remember actually very vividly when I started university. I started young, I was 17. Actually, that very year, we had riots. There was tear gas everywhere. I still remember. I get so traumatized. And sometimes when you have experienced maybe an accident, motor vehicle accident, you see someone died or anything like that. So these things, they stay in our brains till we actually deal with them. All right. So stuff like that, ADHD I mentioned, and of course substance abuse. Substance
Mm,
abuse, we see even as young as people as 18, they are alcoholics or they are stuck in drugs, different types of drugs because of all of this. And being, like I said, antisocial disorders, antisocial personality disorders. People are stuck in jails. Who is mostly incarcerated? We talked about the post-slavery. We've talked about who is mostly incarcerated. It's probably the background that was not healthy in those children,
mm.
right? So they struggle with basically being socialized, the pervasive, the defiance in children. So we see all these disorders in children. So till we look at these children and ask, or these adults and ask, because even in adulthood we see ADHD, we ask them what happened to them in their childhood.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now let's apply this to our mental health.
Yes,
Psychologically, trauma does a lot to us that we do not even know. Like you said, narcissism is one of the behaviors that people tend to pick up. Their
yes,
personality disorders, they are concerns for our mental health. But away from personality disorders, what are some of the, um, how do I put it, psychological impacts that trauma can have on us? That yes, you can become depressed, you can become anxious, but generally going forward away from these chronic disorders, because depression, anxiety disorders, it means you have really gone far, and some of them can come with even psychotic episodes. But in your day-to-day life, how does um, trauma psychologically affect us? What are some of the things you can even pick up? I think we mentioned flashbacks
yes.
earlier. Aside flashbacks, what are the other things?
Of course, the fear, you become a paranoid person sometimes.
Yeah.
The anger, people, they tend to have anger spells. You are untouchable. People that are with you, even your partner or your colleagues, you are unpredictable because they don't know how you're going to react, right? And also withdrawal, right? You could be withdrawn because
Mm.
you
Social
don't know how
withdrawal.
to. Yes, you are not as people, they start labeling you because they don't know your story. You become withdrawn,
Yeah.
you have a low mood, right? You have a low mood, and also you basically feeling insecure. Let's look at people also that in jobs, you stay in one job forever. You don't even have self-confidence, or your self-esteem is so low that you don't even ask for a raise in your job, and your manager or the boss you have takes you for granted. All these years, for 10
Mm.
years, you've lived in one entry level, no raise, no promotion. And because you've never had a voice. Do you understand? Like I said, if you grow up with such, so you are a pushover, you become a pushover now. You become a people pleaser. We've seen a lot of people and
Mm,
they tend to say, oh, me, I'm a very nice person. There's a very thin line when you need to. I always say, for me, I protect my space. You're going to get from my overflow, not from my cup. I don't give from my
thank
cup.
you.
I'm very selfish with my space. I don't give from my cup. And it starts with also the family. You teach your children to also fill their cups. You fill your children's cups, right? You teach your spouse, you teach your partner. In fact, the partner you come together to form this unit family is a person that you need to make sure that is a person that has his or her own story. She knows his story or her own story. He already or she already loves himself, because we have clingy
Mm,
partners today, right? And people, they feel that they are not loved because they feel they could never live as individuals in the relationship, right? So we need to be selfish with our spaces. We need to be very selfish. Give from overflow, not from your cup. It overflows. The Bible says so. If you are a Christian here, you give from the overflow, right? So we see such people. And of course, I cannot complete our discussion without mentioning the symptoms of depression, so that people can know if they have
mm,
lived with these symptoms. Their mood is low now. They are feeling the guilt we talked about. They are feeling shameful.
yeah.
They're feeling depressed. They're feeling no hopeless. They are very hopeless, right? They're just feeling down all the time. Their sleep is affected, right? They are sleeping a lot more,
Mm,
or sleeping less, or they are eating more or eating less. They are gaining weight or they are losing weight. Remember, when you have your adrenaline pumping, you are anxious, a lot of times you could lose weight because you are always in that hypervigilant state. You understand?
yeah.
Metabolism is pumping, is more faster than a normal person with normal
Unusual.
body hormonal status. So all these things happen. And if they're occurring, even sometimes you have some suicidal thoughts coming in. Unfortunately, other people, they even commit suicide. And all these symptoms have been occurring, or you are fearful, you are panicked all the time. They are occurring for a period of 2 weeks. Please go see your physician or your nurse practitioner or your psychologist, your counselor. Then you can get the help you need. Because a lot of times people, they have been used to being in that state. People inside themselves, they have this anxiety. They are in this. I always hear my patients telling me, I feel like I could take a deep breath. I'm in this state. They are frozen. They're numb, right? And of course, we talked about the PTSD. If in case it's been an ongoing thing for weeks, 2 months, 2 years, it's something that needs to be looked at. The
Mm, mm,
flashbacks, people experience the
yeah.
flashbacks,
Yeah.
and of course the
Flashbacks,
avoidance.
nightmares.
Yes, the avoidance of the situation or the
Exactly.
people.
Avoid.
Yes,
Even
you see
suppression.
people
There are people who intentionally try to avoid and suppress
suppress and repress. Yes, that's why
yeah,
men tend to repress and suppress their emotions. So
and
that's
they get
why
the
we
breakdown.
we letting men to come and speak up and be vulnerable. Let's normalize vulnerability.
Mm, mm. Thank you very much. Thank
You're
you very much.
welcome.
Normalize vulnerability, whether you're a man or a woman. It's not up to you to be a hard girl or a hard boy all the time. You need to normalize being vulnerable. And whenever you are in a vulnerable state, be open to share, talk to somebody about it, and then we see how we can help. Now, finally, how do we overcome trauma, whether from childhood, recent events, or even in the future? How do we overcome trauma? What are some of the coping mechanisms you recommend for us to employ as we are thriving in our everyday journey?
Thank you so much. Now, you know what? First things first, let's accept and acknowledge it happened. And
Mm,
our brains remember these things, and sometimes they avoid and they forget. Remember PTSD, you tend to forget and avoid and don't remember it happened. But at least acknowledge something happened. The fact that you feel different from other people, the fact that people bring it to your attention that you are irritable, you are aggressive, you are violent, and yourself, you know yourself that, because at the end of the day, those type of people that are struggling with these effects, they're not happy with themselves. They
mm,
say they are bleeding to people who never cut them, right?
that's them.
They are, yes. So it's the acknowledging. That's first things first, the insight. We need to have insight that this thing happened. Like I said, I went through psychological help to trust
Mm,
the opposite sex. I knew that because I didn't grow up with a father, I needed, because I wanted to have a family. I saw people around me who had beautiful families, and bless my mom's heart. She's an amazing woman who was so strong and raised two girls who are independent today. But I wanted more. I wanted to have that. So I went for psychological help. So I went for psychotherapy. I saw a psychologist. So that is very important. And obviously, some people, like I said, if you've had depression for this longest time, your doctor and yourself, you'll decide, or also according to the severity of your depression or anxiety. Sometimes some people, they do well with psychotherapy or counseling in the
Yeah.
normal terms. So some people need medication. So some people need that. And to treat depression, or basically it takes 6 weeks. 6 months
Six
minimum
months.
period. Some people, they need longer period. PTSD, you know what, nowadays here in Canada, for the soldiers, the veterans, we are training even
Mm.
dogs. I don't know if you guys are doing that in Ghana. Dogs, animals are very powerful things that we are using now today. Animals,
Wow.
they are good because they are reliable, they are good friends. So we literally trade. Actually, I'm part of this organization where I donate money for them to get these dogs for these veterans because they are reliable friends. So they need that
Mm.
companionship, right? So we can use things like animals. And also we've seen also people going through the type of psychotherapy that people need is an intense cognitive behavioral therapy, which would help with the mindset. Yes, this happened, this trauma happened, it's not your fault. So they really help you. CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, it helps you. You see, now she's gonna help
Mm-hmm.
you to retell your story, rewrite the story of what happened to you, right? And of
Yeah.
course, there's also other specialized modalities. I see also my psychologist colleagues doing stuff like EMDR, which is the eye movement,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
desensitization, what is it, reprocessing. So your thoughts, like
Yeah.
we said, there's a lot of dysfunction that happens in your executive function or your frontal prefrontal pre-cortex lobes. So there is that
Yeah.
need to reset basically. So things like that, I've seen it. And neurofeedback therapy, so where
Mm.
people have seen those electrodes you guys put on
Those
clients.
ones
It's
are
amazing
advanced.
how, yes, yes. And also actually this the upcoming new, I'm actually very diverse in terms of looking at how we could help people. They're doing also the energy medicine, the touch, the power of touch, helping
Yeah.
those parts. Because like I said in the beginning, some people were traumatized sexually. I sometimes, as a physician, I prepare even my male patients, even female patients who were molested. I tell them ahead of time when we're gonna do a rectal exam. I have to examine their prostate, or maybe if I'm gonna do a pap smear on a female, we talk about it. Maybe a week, 2 weeks, they prepare their mind. They prepare their mind to come and be vulnerable so that I can do this test. So these are the things that you need also a trusted physician. Your doctor, you need to trust that person,
Mm.
have a really good rapport. So is your psychologist, your counselor. You need to have that, because when you go see this person, you want to come back home changed. You want to be different before the way, after you went in there. So you need to have a really good relationship with your therapist. It's very
Mm.
fundamental. I
Mm.
always tell my patients, if I'm not serving you, make sure that you fire me. Be okay with firing your therapist and your doctors. I
Yeah.
always tell this to my patients. Be okay if I am no longer serving you and I'm not listening to you, fire me. You come first. Like I said in the beginning, you come first,
Exactly.
right? Yes. And then
Exactly.
of course, like we mentioned, if there's some drug abuse, and also there's also like substance abuse and all, you go for for counseling and also rehabilitation, so that you can get the help. I love the rehabilitation centers. They have so much involved, all the teams. You get to see the psychologists,
Exactly.
and then they go into the depth of what happened to you. How did you get to this state, right? And hopefully there's not
Mm.
much damage. And like I said, it can be harmful to your growing brain, and just the supportive spouse or supportive family, and the family therapy. We underestimate
Yeah.
family therapy or spousal therapy just as a whole, as a family. So we need to also educate the family to understand what is going on with you, and also to
Mm.
start reintroducing. If we're talking about a child, we start probably involvement of social workers. That child needs to be removed, needs to be removed from that toxic space, that toxic environment, and then be rethought, retaught to attach again in healthy maybe the new adoptive parents that that child would have. So basically, it's just re-establishing basically relationships, and also just establishing also boundaries for healthy environment going forward, right? And just going for counseling, a long-term thing for some people, long-term thing for them to understand, and also those positive affirmations and believing that self-belief again, and also looking at the surroundings. Who do you hang out with? I always say, who are the five people you hang out with, because you become the average of them. So now it's about time to look at, who do I hang out with?
Wow. Wow. Who are the people in your circle? I
Yes.
think before the year ended, I did a video on how to audit your friends or your circle of
I love that.
students. Yeah. At the end of the year, every company audits their books, they audit their
Absolutely.
performance, human
Yes.
resource. And as a human being, you need to also be taking stock of your life. Every
Absolutely.
year or even half year, audit your life, audit the people in your life. What value are they adding to your life? And if they are not adding any positive value, it's okay to let them go.
Yes, be okay with,
Exactly, exactly.
my friends used to laugh at me, and even my friends, I'm okay with breaking up with friendships. I'm okay with that. And we need to understand, some people were in your life for a certain season, for certain things God placed them, to be in your life, and be okay with letting them go when it's time. And of
Exactly,
course, before I
exactly.
forget, now the biggest thing that we also nurture in our healing, faith. I'm not gonna mention any type of faith, believe in something, and also just doing those meditation, mindfulness, meditation, catching yourself when you go back to those negative thoughts, right? And of course, like I said, with the help of people like Na, or people like myself, transformation coaches, that would help you with that mindset, to help you to always feed your thoughts. We cannot control how we think, but we can always control how we respond to those thoughts when they come to our minds, right?
Sure, 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 sure. Thank you very much. We have a few more minutes to go. So before we get to the last words from Dr. Unati, I would like to acknowledge some few comments we have here. Um, we have one from App. Forgive me if I'm unable to mention your name properly. Just forgive me, okay? Jesse Apmabonga. He says, thank you, Dr. Onati, and he is watching us from Uganda. Martina Roberta says, great show. And then we have one from Thenji. Thenji Bazooka Sharu. She says
That's my
she's here
friend.
watching. Wow, wow.
Watching
And
from South
then there's one
Africa,
from
yes.
Jephthah Salisu. He says he's watching us from Nigeria. And we have one from Libongo Yalusa. Her, forgive me. These names are very, very powerful.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
she says, proud of you, my friend, Unati. I'm
Oh,
sure
that's
she
good.
would.
I didn't hear the name. Yeah, I'll check after the show. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for
Libongo
watching.
Elethu Yalusa. These are
Next time
very
you know it.
strong East African names. Very powerful East African names. Thank you all for joining in. And if you are joining in right about now, we are about to wrap up. But for the past 54 minutes, we have been talking about trauma and how to overcome. Essentially, we've identified trauma as exposure to any distressing event, and the reaction we get from these events is what we consider as trauma. And some of the significant signs you can look out for when you are faced with traumatic incidents is when you become socially withdrawn, highly irritable. Your sleep is there are changes in your sleep. Either you are not sleeping well or you are sleeping too much. Changes in appetite also are some signs to look out for when you are traumatized, and mood disorders, etc. And in the long term, we have post-traumatic disorders, which include depression, anxiety, flashbacks, nightmares, and other psychological distresses that traumatic events put us through. And going forward, for you to be able to overcome or heal or recover from some of these traumatic events, first of all, you need to accept that the event has happened. You experience that particular event in your life, and it has been your unique story. That is where your recovery starts from. we also encourage that you seek help, professional help, as much as possible. Sorry, as much as possible, to help you with psychotherapy and other um, healthcare services that you may need to help you recover in your coping with trauma. We identify some events that can also put us in traumatic moods. We talked about bullying. We overlook these things. Bullying are, I don't know, they are very serious things for me. If you know me personally, you know that I have zero tolerance for abuse, sexual, physical, psychological. It's a no for me. And abusing children or abusing one another in the name of bullying is a no, and it exposes people to a lot of traumatic experiences. Political stress around us. Recently in Nigeria, we saw the End SARS um, agenda, and then we all acknowledge how traumatic it was for some of us who are not even residents of Nigeria. We were very traumatized. COVID-19 currently, the surging figures of COVID and how people are dying. Personally, I work at the treatment center here in Ghana, and it is a very sad event, especially when you lose your patients, people you thought they could make it, and unfortunately they are unable to make it. It is traumatic for some of us also. So the global pandemic, that is COVID alone, is posing some people to some trauma um, feelings, and then these are things that we do not need to overlook. You understand? Whenever you realize that your social reactions, your social interactions with people are changing, we are becoming less tolerant, you are becoming very defensive, you are becoming overprotective of your space. These are little things we can look out for to tell us that there's something that is going on that you are not so comfortable with, and your brain is giving you indicators to tell you that you need to have a look at it. So I think I've summarized pretty much all that we have discussed today. We've talked about gender based violence, we've talked about sexual abuse, etc. If you missed from the beginning, you can watch the pre recorded video when it's uploaded on the channel, and then you can join in and then share your comments as well. So, look, what are your final words? We have just about 4 minutes to wrap up, and then what are your final words for us?
Thank you so much, now, for having me. You know what? You said something beautiful, that your unique story. So use your unique story to grow from it, and also use it to empower the people around you. Tell your story. Be okay with sharing your story, because you never know who is out there needing such support. And, once we start seeing that I'm not alone, people start talking. Your story could change lives. Recently I had an interaction with a gentleman who experienced sexual abuse. And I saw him actually on BBC Africa, and I reached out to him, and he said, believe it or not, I've traveled from Africa to Canada, actually to your country, to do presentations on this, because a lot of men contacted me, said, it happened to me too. Do you understand? So when we share our stories, we're not only empowering the person next to us, we're also empowering the world. And we're going to make this world a better place, because when we healed as a collective, we heal. And also, we want a new generation of children that will be able to stand up for themselves without being defensive, but to have healthy boundaries and also set healthy relationships for themselves. So this is a pledge to every parent who knows actually that this happened to her or him. Go for counseling, go for healing. It's a process, and it's not going to be fun. Going back to those stories, it's not fun when you go and uproot pain, but when we uproot pain, we heal. Like I said, when as a physician, if my patient has a wound, I don't just put a band-aid on it, I debride it. So debriding it, it's cleaning it up, and then it becomes nice and pink, and then it heals. That's how also our emotions work. In order for us to stop having these outbursts, these emotional outbursts, maybe you are robbing yourself of a healthy relationship you could have with a man or a woman who might want to have, or to want to spend his or her life with you for the rest of his life or her life. But because of how you are coming across, you have all these guards around you. So healing is fundamental. And also self-love. Have self-compassion to yourself. Exercise self-compassion. Forgive yourself and forgive those that harmed you. I know that this is very powerful and it's difficult for some people. The power of forgiveness. I actually, before we close now, this is the lovely book. I love Louis Hay. She says, you can heal your life. Beautiful. I love. So read, read, be a part of something, be part of something, join a group of people that went through the same experience, help others. So just be out there and do something that is positive. Those people that do something for others, they feel more blessed. So be part of
Yeah.
something, share your story, and attend empowering seminars or conferences, and choose friends that are for you. Choose your tribe well. Choose your tribe well.
Wow. 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 Choose your tribe well. Choose your tribe well. Thank you so much, Dr. Unati. Thank you for the extensive knowledge you have given us and the dimensions you have given us on overcoming trauma. I believe everyone here who has been part of this session has taken one or two things and they are going to run with it. Specifically for me, the key word that stood out for me today is normalize vulnerability. It's high time we get in touch with our emotional self. Like Doc said, if you have a physical wound, you don't just, treat it anyhow because you're afraid of infections. That's the same way the brain is also programmed. When we go through emotional, psychological wounds, the brain also works like it has been exposed to a physical wound. And if you do not take time to treat it well, it escalates and it becomes more chronic. So I would like to, okay, we have a few messages also from Elethu again. She says, thank you, Unati and myself. My name is Na Okaile. Unfortunately, you can't spell my name right. That's fine. She's also joining us from South Africa.
Oh,
And
that's beautiful.
Amuzu Knight, he is joining us from Ghana. At least I have a Ghanaian person here. All right. So, Doc, thank you so much once again for joining and for sharing all this knowledge with us. Thank you. Thank you so much. My name
Thank you so
again
much.
is now Okane. You can call me Madam Mental. I am a psychotherapist here in Ghana. I'm a social worker also. I help people manage psychological issues, and then I specifically like working with children, and I do a lot of men health and men mental health advocacy also. We organize programs, sensitization programs, and then I do therapy for clients who need them. So I'll come your way again another time. And but for now, if you have any concerns, do well to let us know in our inbox or in the comment section, even after the pre-recording is uploaded, so that we can all learn from each other. All right. Okay, we just had a new message in from Sylvester. He says he's following his parents' orders. Sylvester Mofokin. I hope I got your name right. And he says, going forward, I am going to recover. I am recovering. So thank you so much, Sylvester. Thank you for learning, and we hope that you share your recovery journey with us, and we'll all be part of your story, and we'll all give you the support needed. So thank you once again, and in the absence of other matters, we can call it a day and then meet again next week to talk about something more interesting again.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
Dr. Onati, enjoy your weekend, enjoy your Saturday. Um,
Thank you.
yes, as much as possible, let us prioritize our mental health. For me, weekends are for rest. I like to enjoy my weekend, just sleep, read, and then do, things that help me rejuvenate for the next week. So I hope we all take time to rest and take care of ourselves. Prioritize your mental health, prioritize your peace of mind. It is very important. Enjoy your day.
Thank you so much, Na.